السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. قال الله في كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك فقنا عذاب النار. صدق الله العلي العظيم، وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. The Islamic tradition teaches us that there is much benefit to be found in temporary solitude. That when we are alone, that gives us the chance to reflect on who we are, on ourselves, and more importantly, reflect on God's creation. The Quran says, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. The believers, it describes who the true believers are. They are the ones that remember God, qiyaman, meaning standing when they're out and about, qu'ud, when they are sitting, when they are resting, وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, and on their sides, meaning they're laying down on their sides. And the Quran speaks on the believers' behalf. This is what they say when they remember God. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا. Our Lord, our Creator, you did not create all of this, meaning this world, my life. You didn't create it in vain. It was not without purpose, without meaning. So the Quran, our holy book, describes the language of the believers in a way that it reflects their reflection upon the creation of this universe and where their place is and what their role is in the function of this universe. So one of the chapters, Surah Al-Muzammil, most of you have probably memorized Surah Al-Muzammil. Ya ayyuha al-muzammil qum al-layla illa qalila nisfahu aw inqus minhu qalila. Al-Muzammil, that word refers to the covered one, the wrapped one. And that is a direct address by God to His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, get up from your state that you've wrapped yourself. He says, get out of that comfortable state and stand up for the night prayer, stand up for the night vigil. You know, the toughest sometimes, in Ramadan it's easy because getting up for the morning prayer is incentivized. You know that there's food before that. So you get in a good meal, then you have enough energy to pray the morning prayer. But when you're not fasting throughout the day and you have no reason to eat at 3 in the morning, and the only reason to get up is to pray, then things get a little bit complicated. And so it's really tough to lift that blanket. Once you remove the blanket and the sheets, it becomes much easier to get out. But when you're under the sheets, you're enshrouded, you're very comfortable. And so the real measure of strength, I tell people this and I remind myself because it's a struggle for all of us, it's not how much you can lift at the gym. It's if you can lift your cover and your blanket early in the morning to get up and remember God. So God tells that to the Prophet. He says, Ya ayyuhal muzammil. And by the way, just as a side piece of information, there's a narration that tells us there are 6 names by which, there are 7 names, by which God addresses the Holy Prophet in the Quran. So one of them is what? Al-Muzammil. Muzammil is one of them, meaning the wrapped one. What's another one? Does anyone know? Al-Muddathir. Al-Muddathir also means the one who is covered. So Al-Muzammil, Al-Muddathir. There are two other chapters that are named after names of the Prophet. Yasin. What's another one? Taha as well. So far we have Al-Muzammil, Al-Muddathir, Taha, Yasin. What else do we have? Muhammad, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And then another one that is similar to Muhammad, Ahmad, and one more. This is a trick one. It's Abdullah. Abdullah is also one of the names of the Prophet. So 7 names of the Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So God commands him to get up for the night vigil. And the night vigil, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Now in the case of the Prophet, before he even received the revelation, was a man of worship. So he had himself and his core group of believers that even during the days of idolatry, even during the days before Islam was introduced as a religion, they did not worship to idols. They did not worship idols. They did not prostrate to idols. They only dedicated themselves to worshiping God. They knew that there was a God. And so the Prophet would spend his entire night. He wouldn't sleep at all. So God tells him in this chapter that sleep a little bit, but also dedicate some of that to the night vigil. And there's a lot of merit and benefit. See, when you look at our prayers, the prayers that are mandated to us as believers, as Muslims, there are certain prayers that we pray in congregation. The 5 daily prayers, it's recommended that they are prayed in congregation. And a congregation can simply be two people. If 2 people pray together. But then there are other prayers that are not prayed in congregation. They are meant to be prayed alone because there is benefit in solitude when you speak to God alone. You know, in our 5 daily prayers, have you ever had it where when you pray those 5 daily prayers alone, you pray it one way, but then when somebody else is with you, you pray it another way? Maybe you take a little bit of time just to show the person that you're not very quick, that you can take your time. But with your solitary prayers, there's no room for that at all, because it's just you and God. So when you're alone, you have the chance to begin to reflect. Now that doesn't mean that we should spend all of our time alone. You know, just as I mentioned last night, or was it the night before, that as human beings we're hardwired to want social contact. We live off of social contact. And so a lot of people who are suffering, certain mental illnesses, sometimes you find that the case, not all the time, but sometimes you find that the case has to do a lot with the fact that they're alone. Up to 25% of Americans really have no regular social contact. When they go to work, it's in a cubicle. They crunch their numbers in and that's it. When they go home, a lot of them are single, so they live alone, they sleep alone, they get to work alone, they ride the bus alone. And so solitary confinement in prison is a form of punishment. So it's not that you spend all of your time alone, but a portion of your time, because it allows you to reflect. There's a very, very powerful example in that. The seventh Imam of the school of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam Musa ibn Ja'far alayhi salam, we know through the study of his life that he spent a good portion of his life, of his rule as Imam, of his reign, in prison, incarcerated. Now, some say that he spent, up to 15 or 17 years. Some say that no, it actually wasn't that long at all. It was only a few years. But whether it was 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 or 20 years, it doesn't matter. See, one of the things that he told the Khalifa, the Caliph, the ruling Caliph at the time, who had unjustly imprisoned him, he said, listen, he said, every day of my torment, my prison, every day of my torment is one day closer to your torment. Because every day that passes by, we are closer to the day of judgment, where you will receive judgment and I will receive judgment. So every day that you consider yourself having punished me and that I'm spending in torture and torment, every day is closer to your torment. So he had this extraordinary perspective on his suffering. He would say, and a part of his dua, a part of his supplication to God when he was alone. And by the way, being alone is not the same as loneliness. Sometimes people are not alone, meaning they're around people all the time. They're not alone, but they're very lonely. For whatever reason, they feel lonely. And it's our job to help people as much as we can, not make people feel lonely. Your job as a believer. But he would say the following. He would say, my Lord, he says, I am so thankful, I'm so grateful that you put me in this position, that I'm in prison. And remember, I mean, prison was not, it wasn't prison today where they, 3 meals a day and access to water and access to a physician. Prison in those days, and the narrations, the history describes specifically where he was incarcerated, it was a pit in the ground where no light would come to. And so he would imagine, and this is the Imam of the Muslims, this is the leader of the Muslims, he would come closer to the cell door or the cell opening, whatever it was, just to get a little bit of light. And the officers would push him back, they would poke him back, they would stab him back, so that he would retreat into the darkness. So he didn't even have the luxury of having light. He had to spend it in darkness. But with that, he would say, "Oh Lord, I am so thankful that you have put me in this position, because I have been longing for the opportunity where I can spend some time alone, where I can develop my relationship with you more. I've been longing for this opportunity." Some of us, we long for the opportunity to just be around people so we can get our mind off of work. The people that just live for Fridays and they're always dreading Mondays. They're always just, and that's normal if, in some situations, but you should also strive to get yourself out of that situation if you hate it so much. Nobody's forcing you to do something that you dread. Nobody's forcing to do something that you absolutely hate. But he says, I've been longing for the opportunity that I can just be in solitude, that I can spend in solitude, so I can get to know you better, so I can develop my relationship with you better. See, once we're alone, we have the opportunity to reflect. And reflection is a part of growing our belief in God. The example that I like to give, and I think I gave this example a few nights ago, is the example of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he developed his psychoanalysis, and he developed his ideas and thoughts when he was in the concentration camp during the days of the rule of Nazi Germany. And if you've studied psychology, he's known as, his school of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis is the third Viennese school of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. Meaning before him you had Sigmund Freud, you had Friedrich Nietzsche, and you had Alfred Adler. And their schools of psychosis or psychotherapy constituted the first and second schools. And what they suggested is that human beings, what drives human beings, one is either the will to pleasure, meaning that we're always going after pleasure. That was Sigmund Freud's thesis, is that we're going after pleasure. And then Friedrich Nietzsche and Alfred Adler said, no, it's the will to power. So what drives us as human beings is power and authority. This guy, Viktor Frankl, he said, no, it's not about desire and it's not about power. It's about meaning. We spend our lives in the search for meaning, in the search for purpose. So his book, when he got out of the concentration camp and he wrote his book, he wrote it within 9 days. It's a very, very powerful book, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And so he bases everything off of his observations in the concentration camp, how some people had a purpose, they had a true desire to live, and some people had simply given up to where smoking cigarettes was more important to them than actual food. So he talks about man's search for meaning. You got to have a meaning and a purpose in life. The way he was able to develop that and crystallize his ideas and his theories was because he spent time not in the university classroom, but he spent time in solitude. He spent time in prison, in the labor camp, observing people's behaviors. And so what does it mean to find meaning? He says people need to search for meaning in 3 areas of their life. Number 1 is in work. Number 2 is in love. And number 3 is in courage. So number 1, in work. That happens when you're able to create a work or do a meaningful deed. When you're able to create work, meaning that when you put yourself in a position that you can create work for other people, when you can create opportunities for other people. If you've ever been in that position where you've been able to create opportunity for other people, it's very, very satisfying. It's much more satisfying than putting yourself solely in a position to create opportunity for yourself. So creating work or doing a meaningful deed. You have to ask yourself, is the work that I'm doing, is it just so I can make money? Is it just so I can have recognition in my community? Is it just because so I can earn the title, or I can earn the next position or the next position? Or is it because it's something which is meaningful? It has to have a meaning. You don't want to stand in front of God on the day of judgment and say, God, I traded all of the time, this wonderful asset that you gave me, which is time, I traded it doing things which had no meaning, had no purpose. And look, we all have escapism. It's okay. Sports, watching TV, playing video games to a certain extent, but it all has to be controlled. Meaning that don't invest your life doing those things. It's meaningless. It has no purpose. So number 1, in work. And I say this because, we were joking the other day about the midlife crisis. When someone gets to the age 40 and they realize, what have I done with my life? Well, today psychologists, they talk about the quarter life crisis. It's true, it's funny, but it's true. Quarter life, you get to age 25, maybe you've graduated school and you're working for 3-4 years, and maybe you're doing something that's not so purposeful and not so meaningful, and you think, is the next 40, 50, 60, 70 years of my life going to be like this? So they call it the quarter life crisis. So finding some type of work which has purpose, some type of work which has meaning, it has value. Number 2, finding meaning. So number 1 was in work. Number 2 is in love. So he talks about experiencing something or encountering something. Love. We spoke yesterday about love. Do you have love in your life? Do you love people? Do you give love to people? There's a book, a very short book, and the author, he says that he talks about building relationships with people, how to successfully build relationships with people. He says one way is that whenever you see someone, even if you don't know, whether you know this person or you don't know this person, say in your mind, say to yourself, I love this person. As soon as you encounter them, as soon as you lay eyes on them, it could be a customer, it could be a client, it could be someone at work, it could even be your boss. Now say it, just say in your mind, I love this person. You don't have to say it out loud, just say it in your mind. So do you give love? If you give love, you're going to get love. You are going to experience love. And number 3 is in courage. And what does he mean by that? When we find meaning and we find purpose in courage. What he means is that courage refers here to the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. Each one of us, by nature of you being on this earth, see, God could have created us, and He could have said, okay, well, I'm just going to create the human race and I'm going to put them in heaven. They don't have to go through this world. So some people, they ask me the question, and I don't know if I'm always giving the right answer, by the way, but they say, well, why was this earth, why were we even put on this world in the first place? I mean, God could have just created our souls and then just transferred our souls to paradise, to heaven. Why did we have to go through this world? And so the answer that I've heard is that once you go through a world where there is struggle and where there is suffering, it becomes that much more gratifying when you actually receive the reward. That's why when you read the Quran, there's a description of heaven and hell and the description of paradise. Part of the description of paradise is all the physical gratification that you get. You know, the castles and the trees and the orchards and the servants and the rivers that run of milk and honey and all that stuff. But the true gratification, if you can read between the lines, when you read the description, next time you read the description of paradise in the Quran, read between the lines. The true gratification comes from within. It's when they enter it and when they hear the word salam, which is what? Peace. Udkhuluha bisalamin aminin. That they hear the word salam, which means peace. And that's our universal greeting as Muslims. When we greet one another, we say salamun alaykum, which means peace be upon you. That's where true gratification comes from. So the answer that I give and what makes sense to me is that in this world there's unavoidable suffering. It's not meant to be a utopia. Some people ask the question, well, if there is truly a merciful God, then why are people suffering? That's just part of this world so that in the afterlife, God can reward us. But it takes faith and it takes a pure heart truly to understand that, and some people really just don't have the pure heart to understand that. And there's, some people you can't change what's in their hearts. You can change what's in your heart, but not what's in other people's hearts. So the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering, and this man was a man who experienced unavoidable suffering as someone who was put in the concentration camps, in the labor camps. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he has a sentence which really stands out. He says something along the lines of suffering, human suffering, the suffering that we go through on a daily basis, on a monthly or a yearly basis. Suffering ceases to be suffering once we develop a clear understanding of it. It's so profound. It's so powerful. But once you clearly have a vision and an understanding of what's going on in your life, suffering ceases to be suffering. You start looking at suffering from a different perspective. All of the setbacks that you face, you start looking at them from a different perspective. That's not to say that as human beings, we should never experience suffering and we should man up if we experience suffering and not express ourselves. Not at all. But part of it is analyzing what you have right now in this world and being thankful, being grateful for what you have. I was just reading a book. It's the autobiography of a gentleman who was born just before the Great Depression, was raised during the Great Depression, and went on to open his restaurants and became a multi-millionaire. So he talks about his life during the Great Depression and his family's life during the Great Depression, and how they would rack up, not dollars, they would rack up cents. They would rack up cents in order to be able to pay their bills. He would buy Coca-Cola bottles, and every time he sold 5 or 6 of them, he would make 5 cents profit. And he would be able to make profit because he wouldn't sell them at room temperature. He would sell them at ice, which he would take from his mother's ice box, until he could afford enough money to purchase ice. And he slowly built himself on 5 cents and 10 cents and 15 cents, and how his father used to collect insurance, but even when he collected insurance, people could not pay in money, so they would pay in eggs and flour and butter, but at the end of the day, he still had to pay the insurance company, and how that didn't match up, and how there was never enough money, but his parents were deeply religious people and he was a deeply religious person, and how his perspective, not the fact that he suffered, how his perspective on unavoidable suffering is what made the difference. So finding meaning and finding purpose in life, brothers and sisters, let's pay attention to these small points. So another point of solitude in understanding ourselves, there's a narration which is attributed to our master Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. He says the following. He says, "Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah." He who not just knows himself, he who recognizes himself, he who understands himself, understands his Lord. Why is that important? Because sometimes people tell me, they say, I'm looking for God. And I've searched everywhere. I've gone out of the city. I mentioned the example a few nights ago in the lecture, that in California, if people want to find God and they're not very religious, where do they go? They go to Yosemite Park. For some reason, they're able to find something there. And so people are looking for fulfillment and for satisfaction. They're looking for that center of purpose everywhere except for within themselves. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, if you look within yourself, you'll find the biggest miracle. Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah. Because you have been created in an excellent fashion. The Quran teaches us, it says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We fashioned you, God says, we fashioned you and we've molded you in an excellent fashion, in an excellent form. So part of that is knowing your worth. I was listening to a Christian pastor one time on a podcast, and this is the pastor of a mega church where, literally tens of thousands of people attend on a weekly basis at the church, and then even more so listen through, podcasts and through YouTube and through books and whatnot. And so naturally, as a leader of this congregation, before the sessions and after the sessions and throughout the week, he's meeting with people all the time, shaking hands, connecting with people. So he says, one day I was, in the crowd of people, and I embraced the gentleman, and he gave me a gift. He gave me a gift. And the gift was a box with a watch inside. And so he said, I don't know this gentleman, I don't know this man. And so he said, I didn't really recognize the value of that watch. So I accepted it from him, I thanked him. And then when I got to my office desk, I just shoved it in one of the drawers and I put it away, and I almost forgot about it. He says, well, a while later, I went back, I was going through my cabinet, I found this box. I opened it up and I saw, man, this is really a beautiful watch. So he said, I searched online. Today you can search online, and you can get the app on your phone. You don't even need to search anymore. It has the scanner, right? So if there's a barcode, you just scan it and it'll show you what the prices are. So he says, I just did a quick search online and I found that this watch was worth thousands of dollars. One of those very expensive, prestigious watches. So he says, the motto or what he's trying to deliver, the lesson that he's trying to deliver from that story is that he says, at the moment when he gave it to me, I didn't know what the value of that watch was, so I just put it in the cabinet. I just put it in the drawer. But later I realized, I said, wow, it's worth thousands of dollars. So what he was trying to say is that sometimes, because of whatever circumstances, maybe someone said something to us when we were younger, maybe someone treated us, maybe we had a professor or a teacher that told us that you won't add up to anything because of a grade that you got, a grade on a final exam. He says, but you need to understand that you are a creature of God. And God created you in the most perfect way. See, a lot of us, all we need to develop is self-awareness. Being aware of who you are. Being aware of your talents. Being aware of your capabilities. Being aware of your strengths. I was reading a book recently and it was saying that, in the career world today, in the job world today, most people when they talk about development, professional development, what do they focus on? They focus on a person's weaknesses. They look at a person's weaknesses and they say, okay, well, how can we strengthen this person in this area? He says, but a more efficient way to deal with people is to look at what a person's strengths are and then develop those strengths, instead of trying to develop people's weaknesses. And so the author of that book, he gives an equation. This is an important equation. The equation is the following. He says, talent times investment equals strength. Talent times investment equals strengths. What does that mean? Some of us, we're naturally gifted in some areas, whereas maybe in other areas, we're not naturally gifted. We're not naturally talented. Now, sometimes we tend to assume, we look at other people and we say that this person is talented in some area. Maybe this person has a beautiful voice, they can recite, and I'm not talented in that certain area. So we assume that this person is better than I am, or they're more superior than I am. And that happens because we don't understand what our strengths are. If you truly understood, you would understand that you also have talents and abilities that that person doesn't have. So the thesis of his book, he's talking about building successful teams. He says successful teams are the ones that are able to bring together many people of different talents and create a powerhouse. Not everybody who's weak in one area, or everybody you don't need everybody to be strong in one area. So he gives that formula: talent times investment equals strength. And that's contrary to popular belief. Because, you look at popular belief today, if you watch movies, prime example, if you watch movies, what do movies celebrate? Movies celebrate the underdog. The stories that we like to see and inspire us are stories of the underdog. Someone who's not talented at all, but puts in copious amounts of work, invests as much time as they can to develop something into a strength. That's the story that makes us feel good on the inside. Now, he says, why is that not efficient? Because imagine if a person had a certain talent, their talent level was 2. They invested 5 units of energy, what would their strength be? 10. He says, but what if a person, their talent in that same area was not 2, it was 5, and they only invested 2 units of energy, they would have the same results. So he says, to be efficient, what do? You don't look at the talent, you look at the time. Why? Because time is a more valuable asset. So you don't measure your strength by the talent. You don't invest it, you don't measure it by the time that you have to put in. Yes, it's important to put in time. But his thesis is, take what you're already good at and invest time is much more efficient than taking something that you're not good at and investing time. It's a much better way to live, because time is very precious. So, knowing what you're talented at, that all depends on self-awareness. It's a part of self-awareness. See, each and every one of us, we have specifications. God developed us with certain specifications. When you read a car magazine, if you're into cars, you read Car and Driver magazine. And anytime that every time they do a study on a car or whatever, every time they're advertising for a car, they have the big picture of the car, and usually it's whoever wrote it is talking about the exhilaration, how good it felt to drive this car and take it around corners and whatnot. But then there's always an area of specs, right? Specifications. So base price, how much does the car cost? How big the engine is, engine displacement, horsepower, torque, all of that, 0 to 60, 0 to 90. Those are all specifications. Now, some cars are quicker than other cars, right? Some cars, they can go 0 to 60 in maybe 6 or 7 seconds, which isn't very quick. But now you have cars that can go 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds. That new Tesla Roadster, 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds or something like that. Now, say someone sat And this is 0 to 60. This is, I mean, to go 0 to 60, you really have to push the car. You can't be patient with it. You have to push the car for you to accurately measure how quick it goes 0 to 60, correct? Now imagine someone sits in a car, a Tesla Roadster. It goes 0 to 60 in 2.1 seconds. And then another person is sitting in a car that goes 0 to 60 in 7 seconds. Potentially, if the person who's sitting in the quick car, the Tesla Roadster, doesn't push it, potentially the one that's sitting in the slower car can actually get to 60 miles an hour faster than the Tesla, if he actually pushes it. So it's not necessarily about your specifications. See, each one of us are created with specifications. The question is, are you pushing yourself? The only way that you can understand your capacity and what God created you for is if you push yourself. You have to push yourself to the limit. That's why you hear people say, get out of your comfort zone. You don't have to get out of your comfort zone. No. Getting out of your comfort zone means you're developing a talent that doesn't belong to you. Push and expand your comfort zone. Something which already belongs to you, push it to the limit. Once you push it to the limit, you understand who you are. And when you understand who you are, you stop comparing yourself to everybody else in this world. And when you stop comparing yourself to everybody in this world, that's when the magic happens. That's when you find contentment. The word in Arabic for contentment, one of the words to describe contentment is qana'ah. There's a famous hadith, a famous saying which describes the merit of qana'ah, the benefit of having qana'ah. It says the following, memorize this hadith, in meaning, al-qana'atu kanzun la yufna. Content is a never-ending treasure. When you're content, when you're satisfied. Now, content, see, people say, okay, well, content means I'm going to do the least amount of work and achieve the least amount of results. That's not content. You have to push yourself. You have to do you have to push yourself and understand how valuable you are as an individual. What your contributions can be to society. You know, it's amazing because we live in this world, you know, the world of mass communication and where people are able to reach. Now we're able to reach people in parts of the world that previously we were not able to reach. And I was reading an article a while back, and it was talking about a group of young girls in an African country, and this country was, it's poverty-ridden, struck with poverty. Very, very little opportunity, diseases rampant, very little opportunity for education. But because someone from another country invested some money into them, they developed some mind-boggling technology. And these were girls at the middle school or high school level, in a high school in a village somewhere in Africa. So I thought to myself, I said, how many people are there out in the world that have so much talent, but they're never able to discover their talent because they don't invest the time and they don't invest the energy? See, we need to invest in ourselves, and when we invest in ourselves, we can begin to invest in other people. So, brothers and sisters, develop self-awareness. Understand how valuable you are in the eyes of God. Don't listen to the naysayers and the people that tell you that you're not valuable and you cannot contribute and you cannot accomplish. Some of you in this room, you're going to go on to change the world. I truly believe this. But you have to believe in yourself. You have to have self-awareness and believe in who you are. See, the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, why is it, and the Prophet, why is it that they were so content? Why is it that there was no one that could shake their tree? People would come up to them, they would insult them, they would curse at them, they would let them down, people would abandon them from within their own family members. But nothing would change their level of conviction, nothing would change their level of belief. Nobody can shake their tree because they were content. They knew who they were in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no matter how much people treated them badly or negatively, it didn't shake their conviction in who they were. Of course, this is very much easier said than done. I understand, life is a struggle. We all struggle. I struggle myself. It's not easy. It's not easy to talk about this when you're struggling with it on a daily basis. But let us learn from the wisdom of our Imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, part of that is understanding our why, our purpose. What is your purpose? You know, there's a renowned psychologist who wrote a book on this exact topic. And he says that, you know, what moves people and what inspires people is not the how and the what. See, a lot of times in our life, we spend a good amount of energy trying to understand the how and the what. He says a more practical investment of your time is understanding why you do the things that you do. And even when it comes to the practice of religion, this is important, because a lot of people, they know the how and the what. They know how to pray, they know, meaning the rules, they know how to fast, they know all of that stuff. But do you know why you do all of this on a daily basis? Do you know why you pray 5 times a day? Do you know why the Quran is important to recite on a regular basis? Do you know why you fast truly? He says, if you look at the human being, he says, I want you to imagine 3 concentric circles. So a circle, and then within a circle, within a larger circle. So 3 circles. He says, the why is on the inside, it's in the middle. And then you have the how and the what that are on the outside. He says, the most successful leaders in history, they didn't talk about the how and the what, they talked about the why. What was important to them? So one of the examples that he gives is Martin Luther King Jr. He says the way Martin Luther King Jr. was able to inspire millions of people until today, his speech was called what? I have a dream, not I have a plan. This is the reason people don't listen to politicians, is because they talk about their plan. I have a plan. Nobody cares about a plan. Nobody cares about the how and the what. He says, I have a dream. He talked about the why. That's how he was able to inspire. And he says successful companies are able to do that. One example he gives is Apple. He says the reason, doesn't matter whether you like the iPhone or you don't like the iPhone or you're loyal. I know there's a raging war going between Apple and Samsung. He says it's completely irrelevant. If you look at Apple as a company, they talk about why they do what they do, why their technology is important, more than the how and the what. So even though the battery runs out and stops working after 6 months, you still purchase it, because they talk about a why their technology is important, why it's significant. He says if you look at the human brain is designed to think that way. If you were to look at the brain, the inner limbic system in our brain, the innermost part of our brain, it deals with the why of life. It deals with the feelings of life. The outermost part, the part that's been recently developed in the brain, the prefrontal lobe or the prefrontal cortex or whatever it's called, that's in charge of the how and the what. It's in charge of the language, our ability to create language. Sometimes you see something and it looks great, but you think, you know what? I don't feel right about this. I don't feel good about this. He says that's that inner part of your brain. The part of your brain that's able to make that decision is that inner limbic part. And that controls the why. The outer part controls the how and the what. So we spend so much time sometimes learning the how and the what. But ask yourself, do you understand why you're doing what you're doing? There's an author that was quoted. He says the 2 most significant days of your life. Number 1 is the day that you were born. And number 2 is the day that you discover why you were born. The day that you discover your purpose. The month of Ramadan is a month of reflection. It's a month of renewal of our bodies, of our souls, a renewal of our commitment to God, of our commitment to our faith, a commitment to our community. And the purpose of all of this is to stand in front of God on the Day of Judgment and say, oh Lord, it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my family. It wasn't just about my community. What could I do to help other communities? How could I impact other communities? And so the first step is to purify ourselves, to purify our hearts, to purify our intentions, to develop self-awareness, to make love and compassion and mercy and forgiveness the cornerstone of our